This is the Overton Pod. Hello, Kanthan.
Good morning, John.
How are you?
Fit and fabulous as always, and still as punctual as I need to be on appropriate occasions.
Yeah, I find it's good to keep you waiting. So, it's a bit like the podcast, Everyone keeps waiting 2 weeks.
Yes, there's
the greatest complaint is we're waiting.
The great anticipation, yes.
Yeah.
But it's all good. I think we should actually start off by touching on the whole concept of the Overton window shifting.
Mm-hmm.
And because I've got an excellent real life example.
Okay, go for it.
And it goes in terms of rats swimming towards a sinking ship.
You wouldn't perhaps say that someone might have been fired for this reason before, would you?
Well, yeah, I would say that.
Because it was you.
Yeah, there was an engineer departure based on the fact that I made a comment, an innocuous comment, where I said, rats swimming towards a sinking ship, best Christmas present.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which was promptly interpreted by a person who felt, obviously, that it applied to him. And he then rallied the EFF troops against me.
Yes.
And, the suggestion that I'm using an idiom that has literally existed for hundreds of years was suddenly flagged by him as something that was racist. And, of course, the guys at ENCA crumbled.
Let's talk about their double standards.
Under the pressure of public opinion. But just to bring it back home.
Yes.
Now, South Africa's probably most well-known cartoonist, as in Jonathan Shapiro for short, has ended up doing a cartoon of the EFF as rats, deserting Julius Malema as captain on the sinking ship. And there's a deafening silence from all of the people at the likes of Daily Maverick and News 24 who ganged up against me back in the day, which was not so long ago. It was just 5 years ago, roughly this time of year, 2019. The crucial thing, though, that you must understand about what's happening in the world right now is that the Overton window has shifted in terms of what people are now feeling comfortable being able to say and to be able to do. So we've gone through a 5-year patch where race baiting was something where people just kind of rolled over and said, okay, you got me. I should have been more sensitive to the fact that your feelings have been hurt. Now, suddenly, for the first time, we have a situation where people are saying, no, that doesn't work anymore. You guys have had 30 years to actually turn this country around. And what have you done in that time? You've done nothing. And now suddenly you see this Josie versus Josie memes popping up, which are highlighting the degradation that
Just
has
explain
happened.
the Josie versus Josie.
So the Josie versus Josie memes basically are a series of photographs, very clever, that take particular locations in Johannesburg and from 10 years ago.
Using Google Maps.
20 years ago, using Google Maps, and just simply posting pictures of how those places have changed. And in fact, to quote Donald Trump, they've become shitholes under our much vaunted ANC government. But you see, the interesting thing for me is that a lot of these things are shifting at exactly the same time. So the discussion on nuclear has completely shifted from the way it was 5 years ago. The discussion around borders in the U.S., the discussion around race-based policies around the world, all of these things have come under the spotlight. The discussion around nationalism versus globalism, all of those things have now suddenly become okay to talk about. And this is a good thing.
I think it is. I would caution. I like everything you're saying, obviously, and I'm very glad to hear that things are in fact shifting, and I'd like to believe it. I think on some of the things you said, that's true. To use the rats off the sinking ship example, I saw that cartoon. I do think Shapiro is a bit of a has-been at this point. I really don't think he's incisive anymore. I think his best times were sort of when you were probably in the newspaper business when he was starting out.
Very much so.
And I mean, the stuff he published in the Star
25 years ago, yes.
Sure. The stuff he published in the Star at that time was really good stuff. He's become, he used to think ahead of the curve, and now he's very much behind it.
Well,
right?
it's to the point when we opened our discussion just before starting the podcast. You and I don't resort to ad hominem attacks on people, and increasingly that seems to be the playbook that Zapiro resorts to.
Yes.
So it's very easy to depict Zuma as a shower man. It's very easy to depict
Donald Trump as a shower man. He put a thing over Donald Trump's head, I think, at that one stage.
Yes.
I always thought that was quite lazy.
Well, yeah, it's lazy and it's tired, and I think it's reflective of people who end up doing the same job without shifting direction for 30 years in his case.
To your point, though, so I think I saw that cartoon and I immediately thought of you. Immediately. And thought, wow, why?
No, actually, lots of people did that. Just shout out to Koketso Resane, who was quick off the mark and sent out that note.
Yeah. So it actually didn't come up it came up in a For You sort of feed, and actually from someone from the EFF who did call it racist. But I immediately thought of you and sort of thought to myself, all right, of course this isn't going to get traction. But I think I'm worried.
But again, it shows just how uneducated these EFF guys are. Because otherwise, they would know the story of the Pied Piper, which was black rats, brown rats, white rats, tawny rats, etc., etc.
Yeah. My concern is this. The outrage around you was created because it was you. Obviously they had to find something, and then they found something because they couldn't possibly have you as an editor of a major news network. Whereas now they'll leave Zapiro alone because
look, I brought their ratings back up above 50% within 3 months. They'd given me a year to do it. They're never going to reach those heights again.
No criticism of you.
No. I'm just pointing this out. The point is that their cowardice in terms of bowing to the views of the rabble
and the loud minority,
ultimately cost them. And
it has.
And during that time, DSTV has shed 800,000 subscribers.
Yeah, they're in big trouble. They're in big trouble. So what I'm saying is for me that's a power thing. So they got rid of you. It's the same with Ramon, right? As we've discussed previously on the show.
No, but Ramon's still in his job. Can we get this straight, please? Guys.
This is the best part of my week.
No. Ramon still is in his job.
He is. I think, though, the reason why you'll see people on the right or in the center even now will have noticed globally hypocrisy. And so you'll be able to say, for example, a big international example currently would be the Democrats' latest attack on Trump, and if he wins, by the way, this is all you're going to hear, is that he's unstable, he's old, he's unfit, he is senile. They've been saying these things. If you're going to go watch CNN, MSNBC, any of them, they'll say those things, right? But those same things were not said about Joe Biden 6 months ago. Okay, and he clearly is many of those things.
But that was the best version of Joe Biden.
Sharp as a tack. But the point is and then people go, oh, you're hypocritical, and it's not got anything to do with hypocrisy. It's got everything to do with power. And that's how you exert power. The rules don't apply to you. They only apply to your enemies so that you can grind them into the dust. And so that was the same thing here. The rats off the sinking ship, in your example, it can't just be an idiom. Whereas the rats in the sinking ship for Zapiro will just be seen as an idiom. But I am interested...
Well, because he's one of the media, you see, and because he's part of the media class.
Yes.
Then it becomes okay for him to say it.
That's right, and he's protected. It's the same as there's a member of that class who retweeted child porn a couple of years back. He was completely protected and has been left alone. The explanations for why he did that are... not very good at all. In fact, they seem to be completely false. So essentially, it seems to be someone at minimum who has child porn on his device, which is illegal, but he's been completely protected. There are others who've done all kinds of things in that sort of grouping, who've been left alone. And of course, the people on the other side of the spectrum who aren't protected are gone after. Ramon, Ronaldo, Sihle being the latest. I'd like to congratulate Sihle and Ngobesi, Big Daddy Liberty. A lot of you who be watching or listening to the show would know him because he's been in the alternative, I suppose, content space for many years.
I think that Sihle is a great appointment. And
brilliant.
I wish him the very best of luck, but I will appeal to him. Feto, watch your back because your boss does not have a spine.
Yes. So I just want to talk about his appointment and the reaction. I mean, he has a good example again. So he gets appointed to a job. Reminder that we have no idea of any of the other appointments at these levels. And no offense to anyone who's been appointed at these levels, but they're not upper echelon levels. These are office workers, essentially. They're people who work in ministries, and their jobs and roles are important, but they're jobs. It's just like I don't need to know about your job in middle management in corporate. I don't need to know about these jobs in the state. I need to know about the people where the buck stops. And so, of course, we've learned all about people who've been appointed into these positions who aren't liked by the legacy media. Sihle is the latest outrage. Obviously, they had to paint him in the worst possible light. So they think calling someone a YouTuber is an insult. And I don't see it as an insult, but I do see it as them trying to bring the person down to sort of a lowest common denominator because it is an easy point of entry. Anyone can be a YouTuber, right? And so that was what happened on the weekend. Sihle it was reported that he had been appointed to this position for community outreach in the Department of the Ministry of Agriculture, and that he was a YouTuber, of course, and that's designed to send a signal. Except for the fact that Sihle is highly qualified, has several degrees. He has worked in community outreach before. He's worked as a government spokesperson. He's worked in social development in government. He's worked in the Institute of Race Relations, who, as you will remember, does not like Ramon at all. So it's not even like a sides thing here. And it's just this how would we put it? I suppose libel and defamation, really, that goes on. And again, you do not know any of the other people in any of the other departments.
You see, to that extent,
appointed.
John, they're actually clever because they don't actually say stuff that's libelous and defamatory. What they do is they damn you with innuendo. So they'll use particular phrases. So they'll say things like, he's problematic, or he has a checkered past, or he's a pod bro, he's a known right winger.
Yeah.
And all of these things are damning you by innuendo, and they're meant to slot you into particular boxes.
Yes.
And it's to influence people to take everything that you say and view it through that veneer.
Correct.
And again, in terms of the Overton window shifting, 5 years ago, that would have been something that would have elicited outrage. But now it has worn very thin. And
I
nobody
think so.
cares. Nobody cares anymore. Everyone cares about the fact that in spite of everything that you guys have been saying, in fact, in spite of every mantra that you guys have been preaching over the past 5 years, our lives on a day-to-day basis and the lives of the masses of the people out here have gotten worse in spite of the fact that you've supported particular policies that were meant to make things better. And this has not happened.
I think that's true. Do you think, though, that it's spreading? Do you think it's something we're seeing for ourselves and is maybe just from where we sit and we're hopeful that that's what's happening? Or do you think that is really a message on the ground?
No, I think it really is something that is happening, and it's actually also reflective of greater changes that are happening kind of at a global level. And we can see, reflections of people actually standing up and asserting their own rights as individuals across the globe. And, we're seeing this in the US, we're seeing this throughout this continent. I think that there's a very definite shift that is taking place, mainly because these guys have lost control of the narrative. And one of the reasons they've lost control of the narrative is because of conversations like the one that we're having right now.
I was going to say that I think, I mean, it's very clear you're right on many of these things. I want to get into some of the examples you raised. We've done the sinking ship, but there's good ones. Nuclear is the one I'm excited about. We've discussed nuclear before, but we can talk about how that's even expanded since we recorded that show a few weeks back. But I think it's because the narrative no longer matches reality. And it's so far, the split is just so far from reality that it's starting to crumble. So before, there was kind of this veneer. The narrative didn't necessarily match reality, but there was enough of a veneer that it appeared as if they were close enough. So, for example, diversity is our strength. Or we need immigration to grow the economy. These are narratives that have been sitting in mainstream for 20 to 30 years now. And it seemed okay because, who minds if someone's a different color? Who minds if someone's the opposite gender? Who minds if people have different religions? I mean, these are not major issues. It does seem like, well, diversity is just diversity. But if you want to call it a strength, okay, cool. I'm talking for the average normie on the street, right? That the narrative is diversity is our strength. There seems to be a diverse group of people in society, and okay, fine, call it a strength, no problem. And then what starts to happen in especially the West over the past 10, 15, 20 years is suddenly when you are a town in Ohio and you were 30,000 people and now you get an extra 20,000 in and they're all completely culturally different from a foreign country called Haiti. And those people just view the world differently to how you do. They do things differently to how you do. They drive. Even just their driving technique is different. Their backgrounds are different. And then the diversity is strength narrative starts to crumble because the reality around you doesn't reflect that. And that's a very extreme example. But you're seeing this in the UK as well. You're seeing violence in the UK, which is not what most people in that country expect of their society. And so now the narrative about immigrants is starting to kind of crumble. The same with the reason why it's a massive issue for the US election. It's an issue for our elections, to be honest, as well. Gayton sort of grandstanded on it. So did Herman Mashaba. Both arguably got votes as a result of it. I think Herman in the previous election and Gayton in the current. And I think Julius Malema lost votes through his Pan-Africanism type of stance. So, and that's that narrative. The we need immigrants to grow the economy narrative as well has started to crumble. I mean, The Economist loves this. The Economist, you can probably go find 100 articles over the last 20 years that The Economist has published talking about how countries won't grow if they don't basically have open borders, pretty much. And it's obviously untrue because there's obviously problems that creates, a whole bunch of problems in the labor economy, a whole bunch of problems in terms of the societal cohesion. So these narratives are starting to crumble. Energy is the big one, so Google, let's talk about the nuclear. Because do you want to you have background on this?
Yes, of course.
Go for it. I want to let you. Complaint on the last show. I speak too much, so let's have you talking.
No, so essentially, again, in terms of the shifting of the Overton window, and let's understand why the conversation around nuclear has become so important, and it's because of the fact that 2 years ago, OpenAI unveiled ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. Okay, and because of the fact that it was essentially open source code, because Elon Musk had put down a $50 million donation to fund this, and by the way, that was meant to be funding it so that it would be open in perpetuity.
That's right.
For all of society, but that's another discussion, which we'll go into. But immediately at that point, people around the world then pounced upon the code and then began rolling out their own variations, which meant that the demand for these large language models just skyrocketed. At the point the demand for the large language models skyrocketed, that meant that the demand for the GPUs that end up driving the thinking around these large language models increased, which meant that the demand for energy that drives these increased. And more to the point, everyone who has been looking in terms of the pathway around the growth of these large language models, because they're going to be driving the global economy. Okay, every country is going to be playing in this space.
Absolutely.
And the single thing that they're going to need...
And industry.
Yes. And the single thing that they're going to need in order to make these things work is electricity. Lots of electricity, but not just lots of electricity. It has to be lots of inexpensive electricity.
That is also reliable and is constant.
Reliable and constant, absolutely. It has to be able to maintain baseload. And the critical issue right now that we must understand, if we want to cut it down into layman's terms, is that you currently have China being able to roll out that type of baseload consistent electricity at 5 US cents a kilowatt versus 20 US cents a kilowatt, which is what the Americans are paying. So that immediately means that in this race to build these massive digital farms that are going to be doing thinking for all of society, for all of industry, and which is going to be driving all of the economies, right now, just in terms of the price-performance ratio, the Chinese have a fourfold advantage over the United States. And so as a direct result of that, if you've had big tech in the U.S., who, look, let's be very clear, big tech in the U.S. are the 800-pound gorillas in the room. They absolutely still have the best minds, the best thinkers, the best skills in terms of actually rolling out these platforms at scale and turning them profitable at scale as quickly as possible. And they've actually realized, wait a second, the Chinese have now got an advantage in terms of the fundamental cost that's going to be driving our business model. And we can't afford to be relying on the state and their failed energy policies. They haven't used that phrase, by the way, failed energy policies, but I'm extrapolating. We can't be relying on the state and their failed energy policies in order to drive our growth. So the first thing that happens is Microsoft buys out 3 Mile Island.
3 Mile Island, the place you were told is so terrible, dangerous, the worst nuclear disaster in American history. Microsoft bought it to use.
Yes. And they've bought it to use for the next 20 years. And the reason why they've done that is because they need cheap, reliable baseload to be driving their large language models.
Right. And then 2 weeks later,
Google comes in and
says they're going to be developing nuclear energy to basically drive their servers. Now, what I think is most important here is to not notice the shift to nuclear on its own, which is remarkable, but and will drive the whole world. Within the next 10 years, if you have a share portfolio, find nuclear stocks or find companies that provide equipment towards nuclear and buy them now. Trust me, this is the next boom, and it's not a bubble. Because it's real, unlike renewables. But what I find fascinating is not just the nuclear side. It's that companies like Microsoft and Google, who will have very big websites on ESG and who will talk all about sustainability and who will be, you know, the people at the lower levels not making these kinds of decisions, will opine forever about electric cars and about how we can save the environment and how fossil fuels are the worst thing ever, and probably how nuclear is also terrible up until now. And when the decision needed to be made about how we get energy, these companies who are thinking 10, 20, 50 years into the future, who have to ensure profitability, who actually have to deliver, unlike governments, they said, no, we can't just set up a solar farm. No, we will not get away with a wind farm. This requires some real energy. And so they went for nuclear. And I think that this is the beginning of a tidal wave. Really, this is the first few little laps at the beach that you're noticing coming from the likes of Microsoft and Google, but it won't be long before everyone is singing from the nuclear hymn sheet. And as we discussed, that's a great thing.
But more to the point, based on the fact that these small modular reactors, and the technology is moving at such a dizzy rate right now in terms of these small modular reactors. And of course, we need to weep when we consider that this technology was developed in South Africa. And
absolutely.
What an utter fucking disaster on the part of the ANC. Okay, to take
now I have to put profanity warnings on YouTube.
Homegrown technology that was best in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then pull the plug on it.
And it's developed about 100 kilometers from where we're recording this show currently.
Yes, and as I said, literally one of the engineers who worked on the project lives down the road from me.
It's amazing.
Incredibly smart guy. But, we're not going to waste time talking about that. But the fact is that ever since the Chinese rolled out the first workable ones, everyone else has now gotten the basic concept and they're piling into it. And the concept of these small modular reactors that you're going to be able to deploy into almost every small town, suddenly becomes the huge game changer. Because now, once again, you're not dependent on the grid in terms of actually ensuring that you're getting baseload to the places where it needs to be.
No, look, the reality is if this goes where I think it's going, we're going to have essentially unlimited energy in the next 100 years. And, I mean, that's incredible. So there's a concept of civilizational development, which we haven't really discussed on the show before, but there's...
Yeah, Musk is fond of talking about it.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. It's obviously a hypothesis, but it's an interesting hypothesis in that what it supposes is that you need levels of energy, volumes of energy, to build higher levels of civilization. And we're actually very, very low in terms of the level we can get to. So, they start looking at things like intergalactic travel and the amount of energy you would need to create that technology. And the hypothesis maps quite nicely over human development so far. And in terms of, everyone goes, well, look at the technological development of the 20th century. Look how many leaps forward we took as a species. And especially since the Industrial Revolution. And the reason for that is energy. The reason for that is the sudden abundant energy. I think we easily forget that about 150 years ago, 160 years ago, there was no such thing as a street light. Okay, homes didn't have electricity at all. That you had lanterns, you burnt paraffin or wood for warmth and energy. Nothing was cooked on an electric stove top.
Well, streetlights in the places that had them actually had lanterns, and there would be a person who'd walk about lighting it every evening. Exactly. That was his job. He was a lamplighter.
So energy has really driven most of the technology that we have and that we enjoy, and so you can only really begin to imagine what we would do with unlimited energy. What would the cost of things, just from a practical perspective, what would the cost of a lot of the things that we need be if energy was free, right? So what would the cost of food be if energy was free? What would the cost of most services be? Obviously, you're still going to pay the people. Now, we can get into the robots, but you're still going to pay the people, perhaps. But the energy inputs are usually high as costs. And
as a most basic example, the construction industry will be turned upside down because with incredibly inexpensive energy, your ability to 3D print entire sections of buildings suddenly becomes...
in relatively short spaces of time.
It's short spaces of time, but right now it's the price-performance ratio that's the issue. Because currently, yes, we can 3D print buildings, but it's still not as efficient cost-wise as building a house from bricks.
Yeah, just getting a few men on site with some bricks.
Exactly. And in our case, illegal immigrants from Zimbabwe. Just putting that out there.
Right. So yeah, I mean, that's happening in the energy sector in terms of a shift. What else did you mention that's shifting? I mean, I think
Look, I think the shifting in terms of the race baiting and
Yes. So let's get on.
yeah,
let's
so
deeply on that.
so the problem, of course, is that the entire diversity, equity, and inclusion narrative was never actually that. It was never about true diversity. It was always about pushing particular groups, and it was about assigning a pecking order. And I think the critical phase really came about at the point at which the big American universities, especially the Ivy League universities, were called out by the courts based on the fact that they were actively discriminating against smarter students. And smarter students, in the case of the US, meant that if you were Asian, you had a disproportionately lower chance of getting into one of the Ivy League schools based on merit. And when you consider that the people that were being discriminated against, which were the Chinese and Indians specifically, are the most populous groups on this planet. Now, how long do you think it's going to be before groups that between them make up a plurality of the world's population are going to just sit back and say, we're going to buy your bullshit? It's not happening anymore. And so, because of that, you've had this groundswell of a counter narrative actually being pushed. And suddenly, for the first time, it's actually become okay to talk about the fact that one of the reasons why some communities progress at a faster rate is because of IQ. So, interesting comparison if you take a look at the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Now, I know that this won't apply to most of our viewers or listeners, but you ask the majority of people, where is Haiti? And they won't have a clue.
Yeah.
Okay. But the fact is that Haiti is an island, but it's not an island that it completely occupies, because Haiti and the Dominican Republic are a single island. And yet you have the Dominican Republic, which is extremely prosperous. It's literally the same physical piece of rock that is split 50% between these two countries.
Yeah.
And yet you have the Dominican Republic, which is stable, it's highly prosperous, and the GDP per capita is on the order of 6 to 10 times more than Haiti's, depending on how you actually end up measuring it.
All right. So how does IQ come into that?
Well, the critical measure in terms of the difference in population of the Dominican Republic versus the population of Haiti is IQ.
What's the difference?
So let's put it this way. The people of the Dominican Republic are a lot smarter than the people of Haiti. So now
Yeah.
one can say this without making any inferences around why you have those scenarios. And look, let's be very clear that IQ is something that can actually be shifted
Yes.
in populations across generations. And more to the point, this is not something that is race determined. Okay, and as a very specific example, Ethiopians and Nigerians in the United States, and I'm being very clear, in the United States, have among the highest IQs in the United States, and they're among the most successful population groups in the United States. And so what becomes very clear is that if you make a deliberate shift towards actually increasing the qualitative base of high IQ people within a particular community, you are going to have a corresponding rise in prosperity of that particular community. And what has been happening in the case of the United States, and particularly the Ivy League schools, is it's been exactly the opposite thing. Instead of they going out of their way to encourage filling of places by high IQ African Americans, instead what they did was they lowered the standards of admission for African Americans so that they were no longer encouraging a qualitative process where the best of the best could develop and then play leadership roles in those communities. And now that it's finally been struck down by the Supreme Court, they suddenly at a loss for what to do, because their
Well, they
entire game
have been
plan.
manipulating that since the
They've
decision.
been trying. They've been trying.
There's been some manipulation. Harvard, for example.
But also, take the view that a significant chunk of their alumni, and these are the people who actually fund these institutions, because unlike South Africa, they don't get money. Well, they get federal tax subsidies, but they don't actually get a physical cash handout. Unlike the situation in South Africa, you have alumni who actually donate money to those institutions. I mean, I still send money every year when annual giving happens to my alma mater. And the thing is that the people who are now providing the money for these institutions are people who came through these institutions when it was a meritocracy. And do they like a scenario where the fact that these schools had been built into what they were based on the fact that they sought out the best possible candidates and built their reputation on that basis? Are they willing to continue funding if this thing is being driven south by a bunch of Marxist administrators running these things? No. So there is that huge pressure that's coming at the same time in terms of the way in which those university endowments are being administered. And the alumni are stepping up and saying, no, you're going to get your house in order. And this is going to revert to being a meritocratic society. And then you couple that with exactly the same mantra now coming out from everyone who's been aligning themselves with Donald Trump. And you can see immediately why there's a ripple effect happening around the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think this also does link back a little bit to the calling everyone racist, and or any ist, right? That became a thing over the past. It really was 10 years. I mean, it started somewhere around 2013, 2014, somewhere in that ballpark. Obama's second term, I find it funny, this week he was on the campaign trail for Kamala, which is how you know she's doing badly. Sorry, Kamala. And he was one of the comments he made was, how did we become this divided and this bitter as a country? Which is a hilarious comment coming from the person who made the country divided and bitter, because Obama's second term was essentially focused on that. He spent his second term driving divisive issues, pushing race as a dividing factor in the country, calling people racist, and really fomenting that, and so this has been happening globally, and obviously there are trends that happen. South Africa is an interesting one because it's almost like we're the testing ground for a lot of this stuff just because of our history. So it's really easy to light a race fire in this country. And it just, though, is losing effect, right? We just called one too many estate agents racist, and one too many like random people homophobic, and one too many people whatever ist you want. And so now you're getting that separation that I mentioned from the narrative versus reality, and people are questioning and going, okay, well, is this racist? Is this whatever? Bigoted in some way, and also people are sometimes going, well, if it says something which people don't like, but that thing happens to be true, then I don't care. That's the other thing that's sort of going on. So if I can be called something based on this, but it's a true fact, I don't care. And there's some danger in that. I mean, there's certainly, from my perspective, there's definitely increase in anti-Semitism, for example, globally and online. Obviously, that's always going to flare whenever Israel's in a war with anyone, because it's just an excuse. But so there are dangers to that. But I also think that we all need to be adults. So it's like if people say things you don't like, okay, they say things you don't like. Yeah, I saw an interesting comment the other day about why America is more successful than every other country on the planet. And, why, as you say, China has got a lot of power, a lot of manpower, money, all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's those guys in Silicon Valley who control the entire tech industry, which is the sort of most front-running, forward-thinking industry in the world. And why is that? And someone said, well, it's freedom of speech.
Absolutely.
That's the reason.
Yes.
That's the single greatest reason.
The single greatest reason. And so you ask Elon Musk, why he dropped $45 billion on buying Twitter. And that was his answer. It's because freedom of speech is what actually makes all of this stuff possible.
Yeah, because you get to think, and you get to express, and you get to be dumb, and you get to be smart, and you get to be tested, because the stuff you put out there then gets a response, and you then get to assess that response and respond to it. And yeah, it's an interesting process, and it seems to be fundamentally true, because Europe has gone down this road of sort of clamping down on freedom of expression and speech for the last 60 years. And they haven't really done anything great in that time. And they've been mired in bureaucracy. The United Kingdom, obviously, hilarious that it's still called the kingdom, but the same kind of thing, that a country like that an empire like that once ruled sort of 2/3 of the known earth, and is now down to arguing about whether they should paint their police cars in rainbow flag colors.
John, you must also understand the backdrop to this stuff actually happening. Again, comes from the fact that this entire narrative control effectively meant that all of Europe was emasculated.
Yeah.
And it was essentially driven by the two main agents of change, which are, the National Endowment for Democracy and the Open Society Foundation, which have their tentacles throughout all of these societies.
Who's National Endowment for Democracy? I don't know them well.
The NED is basically a front for the CIA.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't put it any more differently than that. Seriously, people.
And their political beliefs are left-leaning.
No, their political beliefs are very much related to ensuring the hegemony of the American deep state. Okay. We have to actually understand that the left-leaning narrative, and Soviet Union being a case in point, East Germany being a case in point, Romania being a case in point, when we're talking about the Cold War era, the left-wing narrative holds the keys to power over your populace. And that's the reason for the left-wing narrative. It's got nothing to do with belief in a left-wing narrative. It's to ensure that you have control over those societies. And
just so that I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is that if you're on the left, you more believe in controlling speech. If you're on the right, you less believe in controlling speech. Shall we rather go with the left-wing narrative?
Absolutely.
That's what you're getting at.
Yes.
Okay.
Because you're doing so in the name of things that are purportedly honorable, like equality. Although now we don't call it equality anymore. Now we call it equity, because
fairness became equality, and then equality became equity.
Yes.
Yeah.
So effectively, what has happened is that exactly the same NGOs that cause huge problems in our country. And you see this happening on a daily basis. Whenever we try to evict people from buildings in downtown Johannesburg, and there's an NGO that steps in
to prevent it
and takes us to court, and they have foreign money and lots of expensive lawyers that they're able to bring to the fight, and they effectively stop it. And this entire pattern has continued throughout Europe. So effectively, Europe has been entirely emasculated by these organizations, which were able to shift narratives in every single country throughout Europe, which is why Europe is a pale shadow of where it was 10 years ago. You consider that 10 years ago, Europe was on a path of economic growth that could have well positioned it to challenge the United States. Well, and establish itself, effectively as a United States of Europe. And
it should be. It was. So, let's be clear on this. The United States its greatest period was actually during the 20th century. It didn't have, it was building itself to that point, certainly, and there were some great moments in America through the late 1700s, 1800s. But really, the 1900s is when America made itself. Before that, Europe was the leader of the world. Europe was where everything happened. Europe was the place inventing, the place exploring, the place creating, where all the great literature, even all the political theory that we look at today. Americans will talk about their founding fathers, but their founding fathers were referencing Europeans, and so even their great intellectuals of today are still referencing those same Europeans. So where Europe has ended up is quite sad. And people talk about, the civilizational or empire collapse. They look at America and say, well, it's the end of that empire, because you can tell certain things about the Romans and the Greeks, and those you see that happening in the United States. But I would argue we've already seen empire collapse of the European empire. That has already occurred.
And I'm saying that the collapse of the European empire has occurred very precisely because of the influence of those NGOs, which disrupted the fabric of those societies. And it then became very easy for the US to then come in and further disrupt at an economic level. Because remember, the single biggest threat to the world for most of the 20th century, well, certainly for the first half of the 20th century, was Germany.
Yeah.
Okay, responsible for driving 2 world wars, but loses the First World War, very short space of time, becomes resurgent, and again builds itself into a powerful military force that literally takes the rest of the world to end up defeating. And now you get in the 21st century, when Germany is on the path to once again becoming the dominant power. And let's be very clear that the entire basis of the euro was the Deutschmark. And to this day, it's still Germany's economy that is the backbone of the euro.
Yeah.
And we had Germany on its path to actually being resurgent and becoming probably the second biggest economy in the world. Except you suddenly had nuclear power plants being shut down in Germany.
Yeah, under Merkel.
Yeah, under Merkel. Again, where does that narrative come from? That comes from the narrative of the NGOs that fund the Greens Party, that then end up making a push to shut down nuclear energy, which was absolutely the most insane thing that a country could do. And then the second part of it comes when Joe Biden takes out the Nord Stream pipeline. Because up until that point, the German economy was actually doing incredibly well because they had cheap, unlimited energy in the form of Russian gas. And so you have the Nord Stream pipeline being taken out, and the US says, not to worry, we're going to provide you with liquefied natural gas that we're going to ship across to you. Oh, by the way, it's going to be about 4 or 5 times more than what you were paying Russia, but that's okay.
So what I'm interested in your interpretation of the dichotomy that occurs, though, because if I look at the Democratic Party in the US, I would say that they are essentially Europeans in that they want America to become like Europe. If you look at a lot of the things they push, a lot of the policy, the only thing that they would disagree with Europe on, France, Germany, any of these countries in terms of their legal side of things would be abortion, because obviously there are limits across the whole of Europe on abortion, and the Democrats don't want any limits. But other than that, they seem to be Europhiles, the Democrat Party. And I've often looked at them and gone, if you wanted to sort of cook up a conspiracy, well, to me it looks like the EU is essentially, the EU Commission, Brussels, is essentially controlling the Democrat Party, because they say the same things, they speak the same words, they want the same policies.
No, it goes back to my earlier point that if you can drive that Marxist narrative across the board, it allows for the control of the societies, which ultimately means that the real power brokers, who are the people who decide that Kamala Harris is going to be the presidential candidate, she didn't get there because of the fact that she won primaries. She was there because the Democratic Party insiders decided she is going to be our candidate. And we are not going to allow RFK Jr., we are not going to allow Tulsi Gabbard, we are not going to allow Marianne Williamson, we're not going to allow, all of these people who would have made really good presidential candidates, but were shut down because of the fact that they were not part of the narrative and because they dared to espouse the things that actually made the U.S. great. Individuality, freedom of speech, right to bear arms.
So, because all I'm saying is it looks to me like it's gone across the pond, according to what you're saying. It's gone across the pond, and now it's coming back across the pond.
Well, I'm saying that Europe was phase one, and now Europe is effectively a vassal state of the U.S. Let's be very clear about that. Okay, they're not able to do very simple. I mean, so Meloni was now trying to deport
some immigrants. Illegal immigrants.
Illegal immigrants, yeah. What happens is the European Court of Human Rights says, no, you can't do it. Yeah. Okay? You are prime minister of the country. You are trying to sort out your country. You made a promise, but you can't do it. And you have the European Court of Human Rights and just the entire EU itself, an unelected president in the form of Ursula von der Leyen, who gets to dictate internal policy in all of these countries. And that internal policy aligns with exactly the narrative that is now, that under the Biden administration has made its way across into the U.S. Like I said, Europe was phase one. Europe is now effectively done and dusted.
Phase one of what? Globalism.
Yes,
is
exactly.
Is globalism as an end goal?
Exactly. So
one world government. Basically.
Exactly. So there's no coming back for Europe. Let's be very clear about this.
Really, no coming back.
There's no coming back. There's no coming back. The only chance that Europe would have in terms of coming back is energy independence for Germany. But remember that Germany is now effectively deindustrialized. Okay, so
getting worse.
Yeah, so Volkswagen is laying off tens of thousands of workers.
And the cost of their products are going through the roof,
yes,
while the equivalent Chinese product is sometimes up to a third of the price.
But again, one of the reasons why is because the Chinese have the ability to keep their currency artificially low. The Europeans can't do that because the Europeans don't set the value of their currency. The value of their currency is set by the U.S., and the U.S. ensures that their products are always more expensive.
How do you think that plays out, assuming a Trump win?
So, assuming a Trump win, there's going to be an interesting turnaround in terms of the priorities. So, the first thing to consider is that use the example of Twitter. And I think Twitter's a great case in point. Because Elon Musk takes over Twitter. He lays off 80% of the workforce as an immediate first step. Okay, think of all of the innovations that Twitter has rolled out since then. Okay, they've rolled out Twitter Spaces. They've verification, subscription accounts, community
being
nodes.
Able to publish a whole article on
long form articles, monetization for subscribers. All within the short space of a couple of years. Now, consider the same model now applied to the U.S. government. And if you take the U.S. government and you effectively strip away 80% of the workforce of the entire bureaucracy. By the way, a lot of the 400,000 jobs that Joe Biden claims to have created over the past period were actually not jobs that were created, but an expansion of government. So they became further government jobs.
Yes, which is just a draw on taxpayer funds.
Exactly. So it's not really adding value.
It's not growth.
Yes.
It's not GDP.
Right.
Well, it is. It'll be shown as GDP.
So, yeah.
But it's not. I heard a great GDP joke, I must tell you. Anyway, carry on.
All right. Okay, so you strip out 80% of the cost base of government, which is the single biggest thing, okay, which then frees that money. You don't get it immediately because obviously you give people a period, but just effectively by removing those 80% of people from their desks means immediately that government is not going to be able to do its job. And what is government's job currently in the U.S.? It's actually to prevent all of the things that make the U.S. great through overregulation. Okay, and the classic point being that the reason why SpaceX was not able to do launches was because of the fact that there's a bureaucrat in California who actually took exception to Elon Musk's tweets.
I have to stop you there for a second and say, did you hear the anecdote that Elon Musk spoke about at the rally recently with regards to the sharks and the whales?
I didn't.
Oh, I got to rehash the story. So please do go find the clip online because it's funnier from Elon. But essentially, he wants to launch rockets. So some marine environmental agency.
I do remember, yes, but please carry on.
He comes along and goes, it's great that you want to launch rockets and land them back in the ocean, but we're worried about the sharks. So Elon says, okay, what about the, well, you could hit a shark. You could hurt a shark. So Elon says, all right, what do you need? No, that we want you to prove that you're not going to harm sharks with your rockets. Okay, can you give us the data for the sharks and then we'll tell you what the chances are we'll harm a shark? Oh, no, we can't give you the data. Why not? Well, because it's classified, because if people we don't want get hold of the data, they'll know where the sharks are. So eventually they get, that's the first part. So then eventually they get the data and they crunch the numbers and they're like, we can confirm we are not going to harm any sharks with our rockets. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of context, the Pacific Ocean is about 60 million square miles. It's a couple of billion football fields. That's how big it is. It's massive. Okay.
Look, I think more crucially, if you just take a look at a globe and swing it around, so you're looking at the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, you can't see any land.
You would think the entire planet is made of water.
100%. So then they turn around and go
50%.
Then they go, Then they go, what about the whales? So Elon turns around and goes, if you look at the Earth, a satellite photo of the Earth, how often do you see whale versus ocean? Right? Obviously never. He's like, frankly, if a whale gets hit by a rocket, the whale had it coming because the chances are so slim. Anyway, they crunched the whale data, but it was an incredible anecdote. And obviously he's exposed to a lot of bureaucracy because he's got it across all of his companies in various industries. It was an incredible anecdote about the bureaucracy of government and how it just gets in the way of progress, and how people are so myopic because, all right, and we had this in South Africa. We had Shell wanted to drill off our coast for oil. It would have made us a lot of money. It would have created jobs. It would have improved our economy. It probably would have dropped the fuel price. It would have done a lot of good things for this country. But in just surveying for where they were going to drill, it turns out that they might, not would have, might have killed some whales. Might. Now, and it
was entire speculation.
It was speculation, okay? And if they had killed whales, it would have been a handful of whales, okay? Of the hundreds of thousands that there probably are in the ocean.
If they had killed those whales, those carcasses would have washed up on shore.
Well, they would have, and also they would have been a part of the circle of life because the ones that didn't would have been eaten in the ocean, and the ones that washed up on shore, same story. But anyway, so the whole thing was scuppered because we might harm some whales. But on the other side...
But you see, that's the narrative that gets pushed by these globalists. But fundamentally what it is to prevent energy independence. Yeah. Because once you have energy independence, all of the other independence in the country just flows from that fact.
My concern is that I hear you, but even if you take out that back end and you just say, all right, if people hadn't have made a noise, Shell would be surveying, or would have surveyed long ago now, and may have very well put up oil rigs off our coast, in which case we'd already be benefiting. And we're not, because enough people in the society who drive Prados, which chew oil, put flags to stop, stickers to stop Shell, and feel really proud of themselves that, you've got a job where you can afford to buy a nice SUV, but good on you. And then you'll complain about the squalor in the country, and you'll complain about squatter camps, and this is the links people don't seem to make between actions, and all actions. It's the Thomas Sowell quote: there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So if you don't want to kill a few whales, that's fine, but then you don't get billions of dollars of investment in your economy. If you want the billions of dollars of investment in your economy, you might get a few dead whales. Those are the options. The options aren't unicornia. You don't get billions of investment in the economy, no dead whales, nothing bad happens. It's not how this works. This is for long been the argument against fracking in the Karoo, for example. Oh, we're fracking the Karoo, it will look ugly. Well, yeah, if you go over to the very small area, surface area of a fracking well, yeah, that won't look particularly pretty, but you won't even notice it's there.
But let's also remember that up until the time of the discovery of crude oil, the main source of oil on the planet was whales. Can we be clear about this?
Yeah.
Okay.
So whales would be extinct if it wasn't for fossil fuels.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's quite something.
So, yeah, but we
I
kind
did
of
take you off on a path there.
Yeah, we kind of did go off on a bit of a
tangent.
Of a tangent out there. But I think just take my point right now in terms of Europe, because they are effectively deindustrialized, and there's no coming back from this. And
why not? Why could they not come back from it?
well, the only way that they could come back from it is if Germany is able to reassert its independence and its sense of national identity. And look, frankly, the last 2 times they did that, I was less than comfortable with the idea.
Why does it have to be Germany, though? Why could France not become a powerhouse again? They were once in history. Why could the United Kingdom not become a powerhouse again? Why could one of the Eastern European states not become a powerhouse?
So it fundamentally comes back to the question of whether you have access to resources, first and foremost, in order to be able to build that type of economy. And right now, with the way in which the borders have effectively been drawn up, let's be very clear, the former Yugoslavia had the potential to become a powerhouse, but that was carved up.
Yeah.
Okay. And Ukraine, let's be very clear.
Also.
Had Ukraine actually just refused to follow all of this
and just focused on economic growth.
Just focused on economic growth. Ukraine had everything.
Yeah, it's got a ton of resources.
Yeah, it's got all of the resources.
Very intelligent people.
Very intelligent people. Some of the best agricultural land in the country. But the first thing that took them down was corruption on the part of their politicians, and the second thing that took them down was the regime change in 2014. And now, effectively, you've got, and I think most people are now in agreement that the body count in terms of Ukrainian losses is now over 1 million in terms of bodies that have been lost in this war. Because remember, at the start of the war, Ukrainians' armed forces were 700,000 strong. And you've had steady conscription. Well, they were press ganged into the war.
The draft.
Over the past period. And now, effectively, Ukraine has been depleted of its entire male population. So the powerhouses right now, in terms of where the growth is coming from around the world, is basically China, India, and Russia in that order of economic power.
Yeah, I'm interested in the shift that potentially occurs now. Nothing's forever, and relatively small changes, certainly from big players, can make significant impacts. So, what happens now with the United States, as an example?
You see, to go back to the earlier point, in terms of once you cut the inefficiency of government, the bloating of government, and you set the economy free, and Trump has actually this time around surrounded himself with people who actually understand this, because they understand where America's strength actually lies, which is it's in that intellectual capital. It's in that ability to actually challenge norms around how things get done.
Exactly.
And then to build truly amazing stuff.
Yes.
That, frankly, if you just look in terms of what Elon has done with SpaceX, just over the past 2 years, just in terms of the economics of it. And, fundamentally what it gets down to is he's saying when you get the, currently it's about $10,000 per kilogram to get something into space. And he wants to get it down to $10 a kilogram.
Which would make space travel for humans very cheap, actually.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
we would
but
no
it-
longer go to airports. We'd go to spaceports.
Well, that becomes one of the things, yes, because it's far more efficient to just
Go up into low Earth orbit.
Exactly, and then you come all the way down, and it becomes very quick.
Travel
and,
to London in an hour and a half or something like that.
and very efficient, and no sonic booms en route. But it also means that your ability to then do things like chase asteroids and mine them, and of course to then look at actually colonizing other planets, and just the possibilities become immense. And the single biggest obstacle to this over the past 50 years has been the U.S. government, because it has been the single stumbling block. I mean, you consider, why is it 50 years since we've been able to put a person on the moon?
Well, if you believe we went to the moon, I mean, if you watch Rogan, yeah, I think you and I are both on the same page on the moon landing.
Yes.
We both believe that definitely did happen.
Yes.
I know there will be some angry commenters now.
I've no doubt, and
Yeah.
that's fine. But my point, very simply, is we understood the technology then,
Yes.
and we have a significantly better understanding of the technology now. You see, the reason why it became possible back in the day is because, remember that America was incredibly prosperous at the time. Okay, during the Kennedy era, when the space program was really became the centerpiece of American pride.
Yeah.
The amount of money that the U.S. had at its disposal, firstly from the fact that it had had unparalleled economic growth over the entire early part of the century, and then secondly, because they had funded weapons for everyone in World War II, and those people were then paying back debts, which they would pay back for the next several decades. In fact, Russia only paid back its last loans to the U.S. on that about 20 years ago. Same with the UK. So they were rolling in money, and so they were able to bankroll a trip to the moon effectively as a vanity project. And, vanity projects are cool at the time, but they're not sustainable from the point of view of economic growth. But Musk understands the economics of space travel and how to make it profitable. And that's where the change has actually kicked in. And that's what makes it feasible, because the U.S. policy up until now has been, in order for the U.S. to maintain its position, it has to do it on the basis of controlling the global money supply and effectively controlling exchange rates and all of that around the world, depriving countries of particular sources of energy through sanctions and all of that kind of stuff, and then trying to undermine other economies at the point at which they become a threat. Hence the play between Taiwan and Russia. But the fact is, Taiwan and China.
Yeah.
But the fact is that if you cut the U.S. economy free and allow the U.S. economy to do what it's best at, it will automatically be the world leader, just simply because of the fact that it has those things that China in particular is never going to have, because China doesn't have freedom of speech. And the impediment that has in terms of China's ability to develop at a faster rate is huge. You consider that if you have a team of scientists who are working in mainland China, and their ability to speak out is constrained by the natural hierarchy that comes with being in that Chinese communist society.
Correct.
Which means that if you think that your boss is talking rubbish,
You can't stand up to
you
him.
can't stand up to it. And it's entirely the opposite thing in terms of the US, because people will turn around and tell Musk, actually, I think that this is completely wrong.
And if they believe enough, they'll go open another company and compete and be able to.
And be able to, yes. And we see this happening over and over again.
So I'm quite excited by this. We're delving into US politics again, but it's really a global
Well, it's the
concept.
global economics and the change that's happening
There's two things.
from the globalist agenda to actually being more inwardly focused on actually preserving what makes nation states to be great.
Yes, that contributes to an overall better globe.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not necessarily actually not globalist in its concept. It's just that the control points are not globalist. The control points are nationally based.
Which actually goes back to Adam Smith's invisible hand.
Yes, the wealth of nations.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%. But I met some people this weekend, and the invisible hand was one of the topics, and it's just a wonderful philosophical thing to talk about in terms of Austrian economics. But the things I'm really excited for are two things that could happen in the United States. So, assuming a Donald Trump victory. I don't know how to term it anymore because I don't trust their elections, but assuming a Donald Trump victory. One is Elon Musk becoming involved, and his focus, which he's made clear, would be to essentially cut the fat from American government. So you've got hundreds of agencies. In fact, even AI isn't able to fully tell you how many government agencies there are. There's so many small little agencies over every tiny little thing. Government agencies for painting lines on roads and all kinds of for regulations. And so he wants to cut a lot of that fat. Now that's going to basically uncage a tiger, an economic tiger that has sort of been held back. I'm very excited for that because economic growth from essentially the world's strongest economic player is just going to help everyone. It really is just going to radiate outwards, and I think we're all going to benefit to some extent from that. There will be some downsides as well, but we will. I think overall we will all benefit. The other thing I'm quite excited about is you mentioned vanity projects, and I'll give you a big vanity project that America has never stopped with, and that is their military. Their military is a giant vanity project. It has purpose, obviously, but the wars that they conduct and sort of get involved in, and the need that their generals seem to have, or certainly their war hawks have, to always be involved in conflict somewhere in the world. That is very negative actually on their economy. It is a major source of draw in terms of their funding and in terms of their expenditure, and it generally isn't a net positive in terms of where you end up. So the world doesn't tend to end up better, as we know. Some technology does actually develop as a result of war. So medicine actually gets quite advanced as a result of war. But other than that, and some weaponry certainly. But other than that, there isn't much development for the average civilian.
But the weaponry thing is an interesting thing to take a look at. And the single significant thing that has come out of these the 2 and a bit years now of the Russian-Ukraine conflict is firstly that the West is now out of weapons. So they've effectively eliminated all of their stocks because they've given them to Ukraine to fight the Russians. And more to the point now, they're not able to keep up with replenishing those stocks. So the latest numbers that I've been checking, the US is now producing shells at a rate of roughly about 30,000 shells per month.
These are artillery
shells. Yes, exactly, the 150 mil shells. The Russians are producing 350,000 a month. Now, one of the reasons why they're able to do this is, again, because of the difference in structure of those societies. Because Russia and the Chinese and the Indians as well to some extent are able to commandeer massive resources and to actually then devote those to industrial production in terms of weaponry. The U.S. is not in a position to do that because the very nature of American society was not geared that way. So you have this almost fringe government within a government that then allocates money to companies that are highly inefficient in terms of doing the same things that the Russians and the Chinese are very good at. So Boeing being a classic case on point. You consider, all the years when I was growing up, Boeing was one of the companies that you needed to look up to.
Yeah, blue chip company.
Blue chip company.
Couldn't say anything better. In fact, Airbus until 30 years ago was a laughing stock compared to Boeing.
Yes, and I remember when the when the first 747 landed in South Africa, and what the amount of excitement that there was around the fact that there was this magnificent airplane that had come out from the US. Now you consider Boeing, it's a pale shadow of its former self because it chose DEI over actual deliverables. But the reason why they've been able to continue is because they've had all of these contracts that come from government that have basically kept them alive. So in other words, they were doing effectively the same thing that the Russians and Chinese are doing. But because of the fact that they're not able to run their companies the way the Russians and Chinese do, and they were hamstrung by all of these DEI inefficiencies.
Not only I just need to say on that, the reason Boeing's downfall is interesting, and it's the biggest reason, in my opinion. DEI is a 5-10-year-old concept. ESG is about a 15-year-old concept. Before that, political correctness, but that's part of it. Certainly, it's part of it. But the biggest issue with Boeing is what happened when they bought out McDonnell Douglas, and the deal there, weirdly, was that Boeing buys out McDonnell Douglas and then merges, but the board of McDonnell Douglas became the board of Boeing. So essentially, the management of the company being bought out took over the company that was buying them out, which was kind of odd. And the way the companies ran was very different. So Boeing had always run where engineers were in charge. Engineers were the gods.
And you suddenly had an accountant in charge who didn't know the first thing.
Exactly. And so what they did...
But I need to stomp on you around the DEI stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, because let's be very clear about the fact that this DEI rot at Boeing did not start 5 years ago.
No, it didn't.
Okay, it started a couple of decades ago where they insisted on race-based hiring practices, which is the direct result of why you've now had... because you're not hiring on the basis of merit and you're hiring on the basis of race, it means that you absolutely need to be filling quotas, and which means that rivets get forgotten on an airplane.
Yes.
And windows blow out. And it really is that simple. And there's no accountability around that stuff. And then you've had disaster after disaster. Let's, talk about the fact that you've had all of these 737s being grounded. Why? Because of the fact that they're unsafe to fly. Again, because engineers have not been in charge, exactly as you pointed out. Then you have Boeing sending up astronauts to the space station, and they're not able to get them back home. And now you have Elon Musk has to dispatch a Falcon up there to bring them back home safely, and has to redesign their spacesuits so that they can come back home. Boeing being one of those cases in point. Now consider the reason why the U.S. is so far behind is because of the fact they've essentially had these Soviet-style communist production facilities, whereas the former Soviets and the former Maoists have long tossed out those ideas, and they've built these incredible military-industrial production facilities that, frankly, are the best in the world right now. Now, consider someone like Elon Musk being turned loose on the defense industry.
Yeah, you would have Iron Man, basically.
He would have Iron Man. He'd basically have entirely robotic... and, at the rate of technology that Optimus is developing right now, it's a relatively short space of time before you're able to turn Optimus into a soldier. And... it goes back to my earlier point. The U.S. can do stuff like that when they are set free at a faster rate than anyone on the planet. And imagine then what happens to the U.S. Defense capability at that point. It's suddenly no longer about putting boots on ground. It actually then becomes about how do you build the best defensive weaponry that we possibly can that's actually going to ensure that the U.S. interests are protected, which is entirely different from doing the kind of stuff they're currently doing in terms of destabilizing other countries. But you're able to effectively guarantee U.S. security based on the technology that gets developed by these guys. And all of the money that was previously wasted is then plowed back into infrastructure development within the country, there is no way that anyone will catch that country.
Yeah, well, let's see what happens with that. It's obviously quite interesting, and you know, I know you like Tulsi Gabbard. She just registered as a Republican, which I think is because she's likely to be appointed in a Trump administration. And I think they said to her, look, you need to be a registered Republican. I would imagine if that does happen, she's going to end up as Secretary of Defense. I think that there's a fair shot of that, which would be interesting because she does not like war.
But she's a soldier.
And she is a soldier.
More to the point, she's a soldier who's actually seen combat.
Yes.
Which is unlike what one can say for most of the Democrats.
That's correct. So I think that would be, I mean, I'm sure you would be happy with that appointment.
Look, I'd be happy with any administration that says we're not going to be stuffing up the rest of the world, that we're actually going to concentrate on what made this country great to start off with.
Yeah.
And it really is not about, you know, who ends up in those particular jobs as much as getting rid of the people who currently have unelected officials, I must point out, who have been there just about forever and have been single-handedly responsible for untold destruction. And, you know, to the, the earlier point you were making in terms of the people in the U.S. taking their cue from what was happening in Europe. No, I'll just quote what Victoria Nuland had to say at the time at which she was appointing the government of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And when, she said, well, we want Poroshenko in as president. And then you hear the person on the lead phone call saying, but the EU doesn't like Poroshenko. And she says, fuck the EU. Okay, and Poroshenko gets appointed.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Victoria Nuland is wow, something else. But all right, let's bring it home a little bit. That's the EU. That's Europe and the US, and obviously it has giant effects on the world. Some people wanted us to chat a little bit about Lessufi. I am not particularly interested in the man. I've obviously known he's a bad actor for a very long time. It's unfortunate that it irritates me a little bit that when I call someone out in 2014 and I say, that guy's a bad guy, that it takes 10 years for the majority to catch up. I think most people probably caught up during COVID when he spent, 300 million cleansing schools that didn't need to be, inverted commas, cleansed. But he's a bad guy, and so what do you expect from him? He's, it's the scorpion and the
So Lessufi is a microcosm.
What's the name again?
The scorpion and the frog.
That's it. Thank you. It's the scorpion and the frog. He's the scorpion, guys.
Yes.
Why do you expect he's not going to sting the frog every single time?
Because it's in his nature, exactly.
That's right. So allegory. That was what I was looking for.
So Lessufi, people must understand, is a symptom of the larger conflict that's playing itself out within the ranks of the ANC. Because the struggle between the people who effectively put Cyril Ramaphosa as head of the ANC and the people who would have preferred everyone else, which essentially means Paul Mashatile and everyone associated with him. Right now, Lessufi is a symbol of that conflict because he's basically the most visible public representative of all of the forces that are aligned against Cyril Ramaphosa. And
do you believe that Paul Mashatile is that person as much as he's been made out to be? Because I don't.
No, I don't. But what I'm saying is that there are a number of people within the ranks of the ANC that have been dependent on those corruption troughs for so long that it's essential that they continue to have the type of control that they currently have. Now, and the interesting contrast that we can take is if you look in terms of what has happened in KZN ever since the elections. And very specifically, look what's been happening in terms of Durban. So you look at those Josie versus Josie pictures. If you run the same thing now in terms of Durban, it's the other way around. Okay, there are all of these places in Durban that 10 years ago were utter disasters, and suddenly the CBD has been cleaned up almost overnight.
How?
Well, very simply what happens is that you now have this government of provincial unity that's in place, which effectively now has an Inkatha premier. And as the premier, he's invoked his powers of administration over failing municipalities, which means that you're able to go in directly and intervene. And remember that Lesotho right now actually is in a position to do that in terms of the Gauteng provincial government around these failing municipalities. But he's not going to do so because he's part of the problem. But on the other hand, KZN has an Inkatha premier who is very committed to the clean government ideas that that Buthelezi so firmly enshrined into that party. And they are doing their damnedest to ensure that delivery is now actually happening across the board. More to the point, because of the fact that MK is the biggest party in KZN. Because remember, they captured a plurality of the vote, just slightly short of being able to run the government. And so effectively now you've got Inkatha in particular recognizing that their ability to show that they can turn this province around is actually critical, and they are doing their damnedest to make sure that it happens. Meanwhile, the situation that we have up in Gauteng is that the idea of breaking apart the Cyril Ramaphosa ANC, or at least to the extent of actually getting rid of Cyril, is an existential matter for them. So it's not about at any way improving the lives of people.
I think also, without getting too dramatic, because I'm not sure I see it quite, it may be existential for some people, but there's also just the realities of a succession race going on. We have essentially got 4 years to go until another election, a little bit more maybe, but something to that effect. And the Constitution says Cyril Ramaphosa can't be the president again. So that means there has to be another top dog. And Cyril Ramaphosa has to go off into the wilderness or wherever he chooses to go off into, sit on a couch at his farm.
But nothing stops Cyril from continuing as president of the ANC. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah, except that hasn't been historically what occurs.
Well, remember that when Thabo Mbeki tried running for a third term, he got ousted by Zuma. That was effectively what happened. And so it's historic only in the sense that it has been tried but never successfully implemented.
Sure. And I would, if I were to be a betting man on this, I would say Ramaphosa is going to serve his second term. He's going to try and then put someone in who's a loyalist to him and the way he does things.
This is my point. He'll put in that person as a loyalist, as president of the country, while...
Yeah, I would bet that that person will also be president of the ANC, because the ANC does in fact like the president of the ANC to be the president of the country, because the ANC...
That used to be the case.
The ANC does not view a difference between those two things. Anyway, we can debate about that, but that's my view, and we'll see in a couple of years' time whether I'm wrong or you're right. But my view is look, you've got a whole bunch of guys going, there's an opportunity, and this opportunity is in 4 years' time, but in politics, it's not a particularly long time. And so Lesotho's just making his play. You know, that's what's going on here. Lesotho is one of many people who would like to end up in the top 6. And if possible, although I don't think he truly believes this, but he would like to end up as the president of the party. Now, I don't think Lesotho has a hope in hell of ending up as the president of the party.
Well, let me tell you how he can end up as president of the party. If they manage to unseat Ramaphosa, and Lesotho is then able to forge an alliance with MK, which I believe he's able to do. So if you consider that you've had the MK as being so, taking a 5-year viewpoint, let's just agree that based on its current trajectory, the EFF will cease to exist. because everyone who at one stage was potentially likely to be aligning with the EFF is far more likely to now align themselves with MK. So can we agree on that? Because
it ceased to exist as a push, but certainly shrink.
They've already dropped below 10%. So what I'm saying is,
I would put them at 5 around the next election, likely.
But their ability to actually influence the their biggest point of influence was at the beginning of this year, where had they united with the ANC, they would have had the ability to change the constitution because between them they have a 2/3 majority. Neither the ANC in its current form nor the EFF in its current form are ever going to reach that level of voter support based on what their current standpoint is on various things. I think you were right that the EFF messed up big time in terms of its Pan-Africanist stance, and that really did not sit well with our fellow South Africans, who are, deservedly quite nationalistic, I think, at a number of levels. But consider what would be likely to happen if the majority of the NEC, which I'm very confident of right now, still are Zuma supporters. The majority of the ANC NEC members at present.
There are 100 people there. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'm saying without hesitation that the majority of them are Zuma supporters. The thing that keeps them from being able to effect change within the party is that Cyril has access to money and they don't. But if there was a scenario where there was an opportunity for them to be able to suddenly turn against Cyril, and imagine a situation where, let's say, there's a no confidence vote in Parliament, and the parliamentarians suddenly defy Cyril's instructions and vote against him, and then vote with MK. Because remember that the ANC and MK between them have more than 50%.
Yeah.
And they were able to form a government. So there's a high-stakes game that's being played out behind the scenes. And one has to view whatever public pronouncements we get from the likes of the DA and from the likes of the ANC against that backdrop. Because, ultimately it's going to be a question of whether there's the ascendancy of the Zuma supporters in the form of MK and a significant chunk of the ANC's base, or whether the GNU is going to be able to deliver within a relatively short space of time enough positive benefits for the majority of the country that will then persuade them to stay that particular course.
I just would... The only thing I'll say is don't elevate Lessufi to more than he is.
No, I don't. Lessufi's a cat's paw.
This discussion that's happening now where Lessufi is being spoken about in the same terms as Ramaphosa or Mashatile or Zuma or Malema or any of these actual heavy hitters, he's not that person. He's a smart politician. He's got his way to where he's got to. But I would argue that Premier of Gauteng is maybe not the highest he rises, but he certainly, I would be very surprised to see him in the presidency of the ANC. I think there are other people that will beat him to it who are smarter than he is.
Give me a name.
And more diabolical. I think Paul Mashatile could easily beat him to it. And to be honest, I think Paul Mashatile is very underestimated. I don't think he's as partisan as people say. I think Paul Mashatile may very well be able to bring in the MK party, but also be able to rally in part of Cyril's side of the party.
I agree with you completely on that. I also, I've said many times in the past that I actually do rate Paul Mashatile. You consider that when he was Sam Shilowa's finance MEC in Gauteng, and this province was really incredibly well run at the time, and that's when we got stuff like Gautrain, we got the cleaning up of the East Bank of Alex and the rollout of all of those homes there that had solar geysers on them that actually, and let's be very clear, that place was a shithole up until that time. And and the Mashatile slash Shilowa regime at the time actually did really good stuff. And I think that at the same time that Mashatile is not the type of guy who actually espouses the public platform. I think he actually enjoys being a puppet master behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And which is a smart thing to do.
Yeah. Let's talk elsewhere in the country because for me, this is, as I say, it's electioneering. And 26 is also going to be a critical year. And I think chances are that Josie versus Josie account has probably just won the election for anyone in opposition. I think I don't see the ANC winning. I don't see them winning the local elections. And so I do think they will be out of power. Mashaba has shot himself in the foot. I can't see anyone in their right mind voting for for Action SA. Even people inside that party think Mashaba's lost his mind. So that's done. So you're going to have an option between the DA and all the other parties who are sometimes good but are very poor at PR, Freedom Front Plus, ACDP, etc. So you'll have that. You'll have the DA to choose from, and then you can choose the Rainbow Communists in Rise, and those will be your options. But I don't think the ANC is gonna pull it out of the bag. Nor do I think the EFF will do particularly well in that election either. So Johannesburg municipal and Pretoria and all of these municipal elections, I do think you will see ANC losing those cities properly for the first time. However, let's talk about the Western Cape because that is where the DA is in charge and has been for a long time. Alan Winde over the weekend speaking to a large crowd talking about the oceans boiling. Your comments?
This guy is, like I said,
I've never seen such frustration on your face.
I'm not going to resort to ad hominem attacks, but
yes.
Really, I cannot wait for this guy's term of office to actually end. He's a colossal liability to that party.
Huge, massive.
Yeah.
Massive. But the issue is his term will end, and then, where will he end up? Because they're not going to get rid of him. The issue with Alan Winde is that he actually has some power within that party.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. So
I'd be interested. Who actually supports him?
Well, he has private donors who fund him and don't fund other people without him.
Okay. Yeah.
And so he's got a nidus of power within that party, which is the reason why. So remember during COVID, Helen said, we can't tell Alan what to do because the party doesn't get involved in provincial politics. She tried to do a party and state sort of line. It had nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the fact that the Helen division of the party can't control the Wind division of the party because of funding issues.
John, I'm happy to take your word for that because I don't have access to.
Yeah, so I can't divulge my sources as an acclaimed journalist.
No,
but I have.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to take your word for it. But From the outside looking in, you see the other interesting thing that we have to take a view on is that right now we've got a couple of stars in terms of the DA. If you look in terms of departments that are performing particularly well, okay, so I think we can be very clear that Home Affairs generally has been getting good marks. I work on the assumption that if we have effectively the stripping out of the BE codes that are currently restricting the ability of Starlink to come into the country. And by the way, we need to dispel another narrative because people were drawing comparisons and saying there's why is there a 30% requirement for Starlink to come into the country, but there isn't a 30% requirement for Shine or Temu? How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, I think you did well on both of those, actually.
To come into this country. And the answer very simply is that there's BEE as a law, but then the codes for particular sectors are actually set down within those sectors. And it just so happens that within the telecommunication sector, there was that 30% hook that was placed in. that, and it's got nothing to do with the national BE laws. The codes can actually fluctuate. It can be 30% in one industry.
So what you're saying is the DA minister who currently runs that department
has the ability
could simply get rid of those,
can
but he
get rid-
chooses not to,
Yes,
so far at least.
correct. Yeah.
So
But this goes back to the earlier point
Yes.
about the fact that there's a larger game that's at play right now, and the question really is that one has to pick one's battles, and there could be a short-term victory from overturning those codes, but the potential for that being exploited by people who will see it as Cyril Ramaphosa being in favor of white privilege will, potentially outweigh the benefits. So I can actually recognize that one has to, sup with the devil, but use a long spoon. Yeah.
Yeah, but I want to circle back to use Jen Psaki's term, and to the beginning of the podcast, we sort of went on how Microsoft and Google are going this nuclear route. And so you have Alan Windy standing up, Windy, I don't know which one it is, I don't really care. And you have him standing up and saying the oceans are boiling. Just to give you a context on that, the oceans are not in fact boiling. And in fact, if you go to Cape Town, anywhere on the Atlantic seaboard, it is very difficult to swim because the highest temperature of that ocean is about 15 to 16 degrees in the peak of summer. So about 85 degrees away from boiling. But the thing is he's clearly being informed by people who are very wrong. He clearly has a certain agenda which he wants to follow, so he's going to follow the green agenda. He has openly stated that he's anti all fossil fuels, and he will only look at renewable power. Okay, so that excludes nuclear. And I just wonder how long it will be before people realize that this guy is not sustainable as a leader, that he's actually sabotaging the Western Cape. And in fact, I mean, it's very clear for a while he's been sabotaging the DA government. Let's take his vaccine stance, COVID vaccine stance. The New York Supreme Court of Appeals has just found that everyone who was forced to take that product must be, but who refused and was fired, must be reinstated with full back pay. And the court ruling stated that the reason is because the product did not, in fact, prevent, this is the court talking now, the product did not prevent infection or transmission. So Alan Windy had held the same position as New York authorities that did that to their
no
employees.
doubt he still does.
And he still does. So it's funny because, Alan Windy is like a Democrat who's wrong, but 4 years later, when everybody knows you're wrong, it's like he comes out with the positions that they came out with 3 to 4 years ago, after the fact, when everyone already knows that was bullshit. At least they do it when they got plausible deniability. But he loves to be wrong for the sake of being wrong. And it's just unfortunate because I think, you talk about the DA ministers maybe needing to sort of make the deal with the devil. You got the Minister of Communications, doing not dropping BE. You've got the Minister of Agriculture not really making any giant changes in that sector. Very sort of small things that are happening there. In fact, he recently pushed BE as a policy. He puts a paper out which Sakelich is pushing back against. You've got other ministers from the DA, Minister of Basic Education. Where's she? We were told how brilliant she is and how she's going to fix basic education. All right, what has she fixed? Where's the announcements? What's happening at the beginning of the school year starting in January? It's 2 months away, folks. That's something we should know about. What's happened? What has changed? What has she done in terms of textbooks? What has she done in terms of curriculum? What is being proposed? Nothing. Silence. And so maybe for the moment we can go, look, they're in bed with the ANC and they've kind of got to just continue with the communist policy. But they control the Western Cape wholly and totally, and they're not going to lose it anytime soon. And so the question you have to ask is, why, when they control everything, do they still behave in this mentally deficient manner. Any view on that?
I have no clue, really. It's one of these, but again, it goes back to the earlier philosophical discussions that you and I have had, is that, one must recognize that the DA, in as much as they're very efficient and they do lots of things very well, they still basically are deeply wedded, and this is Helen as well, is deeply wedded to the idea of a capable state as being the backbone of an economy.
Yeah.
And if you're a capable state, it means that in order to be a capable state, you have to exert control over just about everything in terms of how.
You know what the capable state reminds me of? That story about the machine that can make paper clips. So you know this. I'm trying to remember the exact sort of analogy, but essentially, someone invents a machine, and the machine is able to produce paper clips endlessly all the time. But that's all the machine knows how to do. So it produces initially paper clips out of steel, and then it runs out of steel, and then it starts producing them out of wood, and then it runs out of wood, and then it starts producing them out of plastic, and it runs out of plastic, and then eventually the only thing that's left is organic material. So it starts producing them out of animals and humans, right? And it ends up killing everything on Earth because its only job is to produce paper clips, right? And so that's what worries me about that capable state. There's no idea that they won't run with if they think that that will make them a capable state. And so if you believe that you need to cover the Earth with solar panels, and as the Matrix says, we don't know who darkened the skies first. If you believe you need to cover the Earth with solar panels in order to save us all from a climate apocalypse, and that makes you a capable state, then you will do something like that. And that's why that philosophy is so dangerous. And I feel as if eventually there's going to be some sort of political split in this country. It will only come when we have competent people in, if the ANC were competent and just did like basics right. Okay, they just delivered electricity and water, and then they did all the other dodgy stuff, but the basics ran properly. The roads were working well, the traffic lights. There weren't photos comparing Joburg to Joburg, and it looked like a hellscape. If all parties roughly did that stuff fine, because it shouldn't be hard to do that stuff pretty well, and then you can go down your sort of rabbit holes of your ideology. If we get to that point, the discussions are then going to start becoming more substantive, and the discussions are going to start being like, but why is this your energy policy? Why is this your environmental policy? Why is this your employment law? And we're far from that, obviously.
Yes, but we can't get to that point until we first get to the stage where the cadres are not eating.
Yes.
And you see, as long as the cadres have an incentive to eat by following a particular path, they're going to do that. And so right now, the choice that we had just up until the elections was either you get efficient car power ships, but you allow the cadres to eat, or you get inefficient solar panels, but you know that they're going to be corruption-free.
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, shall I give you that GDP joke?
Yes, please.
So I'll actually, because I don't want to mess it up. It's nothing worse than when you mess up the punchline. But so there are two economists that are walking in a forest, and they come across a pile of shit. And the first economist says to the other, I'll pay you $100 to eat that pile of shit. The second economist takes the $100 and eats the pile of shit. They continue walking, and they come across a second pile of shit. And the second economist turns to the first and says, I'll pay you $100 to eat that pile of shit. The first economist takes the 100 and eats it. And they're walking a little more, and the first economist looks at the second and says, I gave you $100 to eat the shit. You gave me back the same $100 to eat the shit. And I can't help feel like we both just ate shit for nothing. And the other one turns around and goes, that's not true. We've increased the GDP by $200.
It's accurate.
Yeah, it's a great joke I heard over the weekend, and I thought a very important thing to sometimes consider when people talk about GDP, including us. We've spoken about GDP, but something interesting in terms of the value, the actual value being provided. Hopefully, we've provided some value to our listeners over this podcast. We said to each other, what are we going to talk about? And the answer was, I don't know, let's just start talking. So hopefully it's been valuable. We hope you've enjoyed it.
And shout out to all the rats who are swimming away from sinking ships to the sinking ships.
And from.
And to all of the people in the likes of the Daily Maverick and the likes of News 24 who tried to cancel me 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Didn't work then. It's not going to work now.
Yeah, and the plug to stop the water from coming into your sinking ships would just be to be honest brokers. Unfortunately, you seem incapable of that.
It's too late. They're like Germany. They're never going to be able to recover.
Can't reindustrialize the media industry. Right. That's it from us. Thank you for listening. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, like, subscribe, share, and all of that stuff. And we'll catch you next time. Cheers.